Philip Loeb. In the early 1950s, Philip Loeb was a familiar face in American households, playing Jake Goldberg, the kind-hearted father figure on CBS's hit series, The Goldbergs. Behind the scenes, however, his name had landed in the infamous Red Channels pamphlet, published on June 22, 1950. It accused 151 entertainers of alleged communist ties, although Loeb faced no formal charges. His real offense? Past support for progressive causes and a refusal to sign loyalty oaths, actions that, in the tense climate of the Cold War, were enough to end a career. Historian Victor Navasky described him as a man unwilling to play the game, even as pressure mounted. Sponsors reportedly demanded his removal, and despite accounts that show creator Gertrude Berg fought to keep him, Loeb was forced out in 1952. Work dried up almost instantly. By September 1st, 1955, Loeb had checked into Manhattan's Taft Hotel, where he died by self-inflicted means. A note left behind expressed anguish over his inability to care for his son, who, according to secondary sources, had been diagnosed with mental illness. While the full contents of the note remain unverified, the tragedy was undeniable. Years later, Loeb's fate echoed in the 1976 film The Front, where Zero Mostel portrayed a blacklisted actor. Many cinema scholars assert the character was partially inspired by Loeb, even if the filmmakers never confirmed it. His story remains one of the darkest chapters of the Blacklist era, a stark reminder of the industry's swift betrayal. Paul Robeson. At the height of his fame in the 1930s and 40s, Paul Robeson wasn't just a star, he was a cultural force. A Columbia-educated athlete turned Broadway icon, his deep baritone voice and commanding stage presence made him one of the most recognizable entertainers in the world. His 1943 run as Othello on Broadway shattered records, becoming the longest-running Shakespearean production in American history at the time. But by the early 1950s, Paul's name had all but disappeared from screens, stages, and airwaves. The reason? His politics. Robeson's open support for civil rights, labor movements, and anti-colonial causes made him a target during the Red Scare. He refused to denounce the Soviet Union, a stance that infuriated U.S. officials at the peak of Cold War hysteria. In August of 1950, the State Department revoked his passport under the McCarran Internal Security Act, effectively silencing his international career. Declassified FBI files labeled him a national security risk, and surveillance trailed him for a prolonged stretch. His concerts were abruptly canceled, his recordings vanished from store shelves, and Hollywood turned its back. His 1956 appearance before the House Un-American Activities Committee only deepened the divide. When pressed on his loyalty, Robeson famously fired back, "Because my father was a slave and my people died to build this country. I am going to stay here and have a part of it just like you." Some accounts claim the room fell into stunned silence, though that moment, like many in Paul's life, sits somewhere between fact and legend. Despite never being charged with any crime, Robeson was unofficially blacklisted, his legacy buried under decades of political stigma. For a long while, his name was largely absent from retrospectives on American entertainment. Only in the late 20th century did documentaries like Paul Robeson, Here I Stand, and exhibits at institutions like the Smithsonian begin to restore his place in cultural history. Today, Robeson stands not just as an artist, but as a powerful reminder of how quickly fame could be erased. Not for scandal, but for speaking too loudly. Charlie Chaplin. By the early 1950s, Charlie Chaplin wasn't just a global icon of silent film, he'd become a lightning rod for controversy. Though revered for classics like The Kid, City Lights, and Modern Times, his outspoken political views made him a target in Cold War America. Chaplin never applied for U.S. citizenship, a move that sparked suspicion as tensions with the Soviet Union intensified. His vocal support for labor rights, critiques of capitalism, and calls for peaceful diplomacy drew the ire of conservative figures, most notably FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. The Bureau compiled an extensive file on Chaplin, reportedly spanning nearly 2,000 pages. Rumors swirled that various officials in Washington viewed him as a communist sympathizer, though no formal charges were ever filed. Behind the scenes, the Immigration and Naturalization Service quietly built a case against him, citing both political leanings and alleged moral indiscretions. On September 19, 1952, while Chaplin was traveling to London for the premiere of Limelight, U.S. Attorney General James P. McGranary revoked his re-entry permit. The decision effectively exiled him from the country that had made him a star. Limelight, ironically about a forgotten performer, was never widely released in the US until 2 decades later. Chaplin resettled in Switzerland with his wife Una O'Neill and their children, continuing to work on films in Europe, including A King in New York and A Countess from Hong Kong. Though he wasn't completely cut off from the industry, his Hollywood chapter had closed. In 1972, the Academy welcomed him back with an honorary Oscar, and what many call the longest standing ovation in the ceremony's history, lasting over 10 minutes. The spectacle underscored a bitter irony. Even one of cinema's founding legends wasn't immune to the era's political hysteria. John Garfield. In 1951, John Garfield, still a top-tier box office draw, was subpoenaed to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. He denied Communist Party membership but refused to name alleged affiliates. That decision didn't sit well with Hollywood's power players. His name had already appeared in the Red Channel's publication in 1950, flagging him as a possible subversive. From there, the Blacklist tightened its grip. Major studios distanced themselves, though he managed to star in one final film, He Ran All the Way, released later that same year through a smaller independent studio. The project was overshadowed by political fallout, and his once thriving career stalled. Attempts to return to the stage were met with closed doors. Officially, Garfield died of a heart attack on May 21, 1952, at just 39 years old. Medical reports cited coronary complications, and some biographers note he had a history of heart problems. Nevertheless, speculation lingers. Certain observers suggest the relentless stress, public scrutiny, and professional exile may have accelerated his decline, an unproven but haunting theory. His daughter, Julie Garfield, later spoke of his emotional withdrawal and mounting anxiety during those final years. Garfield's silence under political pressure became a defining act, one that cost him everything but his principles. Dorothy Comingore. In 1941, Dorothy Comingore impressed critics with her portrayal of Susan Alexander in Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. It should have been her springboard to stardom. Instead, it became the pinnacle of a career soon dismantled, not by failure, but by politics. By the late 1940s, Comingore had drawn the attention of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Her support for labor unions, civil rights, and progressive causes put her squarely in the committee's sights during the height of Cold War paranoia. Comingore reportedly refused to cooperate with HUAC, declining to implicate anyone or confirm any affiliations, an act of resistance that cost her dearly. Studios pulled back, and her once promising career was effectively over. According to declassified FBI files, she was placed under surveillance, and in 1952 she faced arrest on charges of public intoxication. Some historians argue the incident may have been politically motivated, though conclusive evidence remains elusive. One Los Angeles Times report from that period noted she was found in her car, raising questions about the circumstances, though details differ across sources. Orson Welles, known for his outspoken opposition to the Blacklist, later expressed regret over what happened to Comingore, describing her as a gifted actress who never received the acclaim she deserved. Whether he phrased it exactly that way is uncertain, but his sentiment was clear. By the early 1960s, Comingore was dealing with substance-related issues and mental health challenges. She died in December of 1971, largely forgotten by the industry that once praised her. In recent decades, film historians have revisited her story as a notable example of Hollywood's Red Scare fallout. Her role in Citizen Kane is now regarded not merely as a performance, but as a symbol of talent stifled by fear. Whispers continue to circulate about the extent of federal involvement in her downfall, some suggesting she was targeted not just for her politics, but as a cautionary tale to others. While unverified, these theories continue to spark debate about the true price of ideological conformity in mid-century Hollywood. The Hollywood 10. In late October of 1947, 10 screenwriters and directors, later known as the Hollywood 10, refused to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Among them, Dalton Trumbo and Ring Lardner Jr. were already Oscar-winning writers at the peak of their careers. Their refusal to answer questions about alleged communist ties led to contempt of Congress charges and prison sentences. Studios quickly blacklisted them, and their names vanished from credits overnight. Trumbo, however, continued writing under pseudonyms, even winning 2 Academy Awards in secret. Rumors persist that certain studios knowingly hired him under the table, disguising it as a moral stand or a business move. The Blacklist didn't just end careers, it rewrote screen history in the shadows. Gail Sondergaard. In 1937, Gail Sondergaard made Academy Awards history as the first recipient of Best Supporting Actress, thanks to her role in Anthony Adverse. Her career soared through the late 1930s and 40s, with standout performances in films like The Life of Emile Zola and The Letter. But by the early 1950s, her name had almost disappeared from studio call sheets. The reason? A political storm that didn't just sweep through Hollywood, it buried it. Sondergaard's husband, screenwriter Herbert Biberman, was one of the infamous Hollywood 10. Filmmakers cited for contempt of Congress in 1947 after refusing to answer questions about alleged communist affiliations. Herbert, who had been a member of the Communist Party, invoked First Amendment protections, a legal strategy that ultimately failed. He served 6 months in prison. Sondergaard didn't just stand by him, she stood with him. She refused to denounce her husband or cooperate with the House Un-American Activities Committee, and in 1951 she herself was called before HUAC. Like her husband, she declined to testify. That decision sealed her fate in the industry. Studios distanced themselves, although records don't confirm she was under exclusive contract at the time, and the blacklist ensured she wouldn't land major roles for nearly 2 decades. Some cinema historians propose her silence wasn't just loyalty, it was a deliberate stand. While direct quotes are scarce, Larry Sapler, co-author of The Inquisition in Hollywood, has described her actions as a profound personal sacrifice. Speculation abounds that she was considered for roles in major productions well into the 50s, but her name quietly dropped off short lists once political affiliations surfaced. Her only prominent screen appearance during the Blacklist era came in Salt of the Earth, a low-budget independent film released in 1954 and directed by Biberman himself. The film, made almost entirely by blacklisted artists, was barred from most theaters and denounced in Congress. It was a daring act of resistance, but also a career dead end. Sondergaard returned to acting in the late 1960s, mostly in television and the minor film roles, yet the momentum of her early career was gone. Her story isn't just about politics, it's about how ruthlessly the industry abandoned its own, and how loyalty in the wrong era came with a professional price tag few were willing to pay. Zero Mostel. In the mid-1950s, Zero Mostel's meteoric rise was abruptly dimmed, not by a lack of talent, but by politics. Subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee, Zero refused to name names during the second wave of anti-communist investigations. Rather than comply, he mocked the proceedings and stood firm, a move that earned him the label uncooperative. The fallout was swift. Hollywood studios distanced themselves and his screen opportunities dried up. Though not entirely exiled from the stage, his film and television career stalled for years. Some biographers argue his stand was as personal as it was political. He had witnessed the blacklist tear apart friendships and careers. By the early 1960s, he had clawed his way back to prominence, headlining Broadway hits like Fiddler on the Roof and A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. His role in the 1976 film The Front, where he played a blacklisted actor, was widely seen as a powerful echo of his own past. Critics noted the bitterness in his performance, though whether it was catharsis or just brilliant acting remains open to interpretation. Colleagues later recalled him saying he could forgive stupidity, but not cowardice, a quote often repeated, though never officially documented. His refusal to bend made him a pariah in Hollywood for a time, but it also solidified his legacy as one of the few who didn't flinch when the pressure was on. Lena Horne. By the early 1940s, Lena Horne had become one of the first black women to land a long-term, high-profile contract with MGM, an extraordinary feat in a segregated industry. She wasn't just a jazz singer with a magnetic voice. She was being groomed as a rare crossover star, a potential leading lady for white audiences. But as her fame soared, so did the backlash. Her outspoken support for civil rights and her ties to controversial figures like Paul Robeson and W.E.B. Du Bois didn't go unnoticed. FBI files later revealed that Horne was under government surveillance for years due to her political associations. While rumors have long circulated that her passport was revoked in 1950, no verified records confirm that claim. Even so, the attention alone was enough to make studios nervous. Though never officially blacklisted, Horne's film roles dried up, and television appearances became scarce. Certain producers discreetly removed her from projects, fearing political blowback. The chilling effect was real. Her career in Hollywood took a sharp downturn. not because of talent, but because of timing, race, and a refusal to stay quiet. She continued performing in nightclubs and on stage, but the momentum she built in the 40s never fully returned. Her story stands as a stark reminder. In Cold War-era Hollywood, being politically active and black could be a career-ending combination, even without formal charges. Dashiell Hammett. In 1951, Dashiell Hammett, the acclaimed author behind The Maltese Falcon and a pioneer of hard-boiled detective fiction, was summoned before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Though his literary peak had passed by the early 1940s, Hammett remained a respected figure in American letters. His refusal to identify contributors to a bail fund for leftist activists landed him 6 months in federal prison for contempt of Congress. That silence made him a prime target during the Red Scare. FBI files confirmed his past membership in the Communist Party USA, which only intensified scrutiny. Some public libraries pulled his books from shelves while publishers distanced themselves. Speculation grew that his name was quietly removed from certain re-releases of film adaptations. Notably, his credit remained on the iconic 1941 version of The Maltese Falcon. By the time of his death in 1961, Hammett was financially broken and largely sidelined by the entertainment industry. Yet among writers and cinephiles, his influence never truly faded. Some critics labeled him a security risk. Others saw him as a scapegoat of Cold War hysteria. Today, his story stands as a stark reminder of just how far Hollywood, and Washington, were willing to go to silence dissent. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.